Welcome back, everyone. This is part 8 of the season 3 of early Muslim expansion. We just saw a conquest of Hispania. We're kind of wrapping up right here with the Hispanian side. But now we're going to possibly look at Constantinople. Lego.
Far-flung western frontier of Iberia that Suleiman would spend his short reign focused on, however. Eager to forge his own legacy to match his brothers in the short time remaining to him, he would soon turn the armies of the Caliphate towards a prize long denied them, Constantinople.
And we talked at the end of last episode, you know, Egypt was a huge win for, I mean, there's a lot of wins for the Caliphate, but Egypt was probably the crown jewel of all their wins. And now you could say, similarly, Hispania. I still think Egypt's probably the best win out of everything that they conquered. But you best believe Constantinople is at the top of everyone's list.
Upon his ascension to the caliphal throne, Suleiman wasted no time replacing most of his brother and predecessor's loyal governors and advisors, despite the monumental successes many of them had achieved during the storied reign of Al-Walid. In Al-Walid's last years of life, he had attempted to remove Suleiman from succession in favor of his son Abdelaziz, without success, even requesting his governors swear fealty to Abdelaziz before his death.
Didn't work.
However, few saw fit to take this risky stance against Suleiman, who was the horse with the best odds. Moreover, the rocky succession and support for Abdelaziz from Al-Hajjaj, one of the most powerful men in the Caliphate, created deep divides in the Umayyad court and caused Suleiman to see enemies around every corner.
Very paranoid.
As a result, after Musa refused to delay his entry to the capital until after Al-Walid's death, so Suleiman might claim the glory, both Musa and Tariq were stripped of their titles and disgraced.
Yep.
Qutayba ibn Muslim, who had brought Islamic rule to most of Transoxiana through a combination of military victories and shrewd diplomacy, would be extended the offer to keep his position by Suleiman, likely due to the large power base Qutayba commanded and the threat of civil war. Despite this placation, Qutayba, suspecting Suleiman would turn on him as soon as he felt secure enough to do so, and resenting the appointment of his longtime rival Yazid ibn al-Muhallab as the new governor of Iraq and Persia, denounced Suleiman as illegitimate and rallied his troops against the new caliph.
So civil war was inevitable.
Unfortunately for Qutayba, his position had never been as powerful or secure as Al-Hajjaj's, and his attempt to raise his army in rebellion against Suleiman caused many of his soldiers, particularly his fellow Arabs, to betray and kill him under the leadership of Waki ibn Abi Sud. Although Waki would take over as governor of Transoxiana, the following years would see many of Qutayba's successes in the region reversed in a string of defeats and rebellions, and Arab control of Transoxiana would remain unstable for decades to follow. Meeting a similar end would be the famous conqueror of Sind, Muhammad ibn al-Qasim. As another ally of al-Hajjaj's who had opposed Suleiman's ascension, Ibn al-Qasim was removed from power by Suleiman and promptly placed under arrest by his replacement as governor of Sind, Yazid ibn Abi Kabsha.
Dang, we're cleaning house, aren't we?
And sent to Ibn al-Muhallab's custody to be tortured and executed. Recently conquered Iberia.
Golly, if you look at the last 3 or 4 people that did stuff for the Caliphate, it's all in vain. It's like, we don't care. Screw you. It's crazy, guys.
Would also see a similar power vacuum created with the execution of Musa ibn Nasir's 2 sons, the governors of Ifriqiya and Al-Andalus, leading to a period of the same self-destructive infighting. Meanwhile, Ibn al-Muhallab quickly stepped into the powerful role al-Hajjaj had long filled, and prepared for new conquests in the east. With anarchy reigning in the Caliphate's distant western frontiers, Suleiman's focus was far closer to home. For a caliph looking to make his mark on history, no possible victory could outshine the conquest of Constantinople, a city that had already beaten back a 4-year siege under Caliph Muawiyah and was supposedly the focus of prophecies from Muhammad himself.
It's 7:15. What's a more powerful city in the world than Constantinople? Well, I don't know. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I don't know.
It would seem preparations for the siege had already begun before Suleiman's ascension as caliph, either under the orders of al-Walid directly or during the period in which Suleiman served as acting ruler for his dying brother. Hardly surprising, given the years of frequent coups and turmoil that had weakened the Byzantines during al-Walid's relative golden age. During al-Walid's later years, Arab raids had penetrated ever deeper and more brazenly into Anatolia, with his sons al-Abbas and Marwan ibn al-Walid and his half-brother Maslama ibn Abd al-Malik penetrating north of the Taurus Mountains in 711 and 712, conquering Misthea in the Laconia region, and raiding as far as Amasya and modern-day Chankara along the Black Sea by 715. By contrast, the Romans in the same period saw 3 emperors deposed in coups.
Wow.
With Suleiman spending the year 715 consolidating his hold on the caliphate and building his strength, it would be in 716 that one of the single largest expeditions in caliphal history would be launched.
I'm guessing we're going to say 200,000.
With a land army under the command of Maslama, the brother of Caliph Suleiman, supported by a fleet under Umar ibn Halbrayra al-Hazari. Wielding the resources of a caliphate, which was far vaster than the greatly weakened Roman Empire, the odds seemed stacked far more firmly against the Romans. Unfortunately, the vast expedition assembled by Suleiman and Maslama shared one major weakness with Muawiyah's earlier invasion: a reliance on collaboration with Roman rebels. Muawiyah had counted on the rebel Armenian general Saborios, then in control of much of Anatolia, to supply and aid his army in the march to Constantinople, only for his untimely death to undermine years of planning, stranding the first Arab expedition in hostile territory without supplies or allies, starvation and attrition defeating them more surely than the armies defending Constantinople's walls or the Greek fire devastating their fleets in the Bosphorus. Maslama, seemingly hoping to avoid the Herculean task of besieging and storming the Theodosian walls of Constantinople, planned to avoid having to take the city by force by getting directly involved in Byzantine politics, taking advantage of the civil strife and frequent palace coups that had weakened the Eastern Roman Empire by backing his own claimant to the Byzantine throne, the strategos Leo the Isaurian, whose role in the lead-up to the siege varies somewhat between Roman and Arab accounts. In the Roman narrative, it is Suleiman ibn Mu'adh who first reaches out to negotiate with Leo, and who first raises the possibility of Leo taking the throne while besieging Amorion, offering to lift his siege and spare the city if they would accept Leo as their emperor.
That's crazy. Yeah, we'll start we'll stop squeezing your city out if you take the throne. That's an insane offer, isn't it?
According to this tradition, Suleiman intended to capture Leo, knowing of the strategos' enmity for Emperor Theodosius, who had taken power in a coup in May of the previous year, and convince him to take the throne with Arab backing and lead the empire into submission and vassalage.
Wow.
Yet, despite holding correspondence with first Suleiman and then Maslama, in the Roman narrative, Leo never falls into Arab hands or forms any pact with the invaders. Escaping their net through trickery, he rallied the defences of the countryside behind him, foiling Suleiman ibn Mu'adh's advance force, before seizing control of the empire from the weak and unpopular Theodosius.
So he got what he wanted without even their support. That's crazy.
On his own, after capturing the royal household with his army at Nicomedia. In contrast, the Arab narrative has Leo reach out to Caliph Suleiman to negotiate, deceitfully assuring him that he will deliver Constantinople into Arab hands. Though either account could be somewhat falsified, the level of trust Maslama shows to Leo later in the siege would be highly surprising had their initial interactions been so short and hostile, as claimed in the account of Theophanes the Confessor,
so who knows?
Suggesting at least some arrangements had been made between the two, whether the Arab accounts are fully truthful or not.
That makes sense.
It should be noted that the dates are also slightly inconsistent between these two accounts, with the history of al-Tabari placing the siege somewhat earlier than Theophanes the Confessor. While both provide valuable insight, the latter provides more consistent dates and is far closer to being contemporary with the events enclosed, with the following dates primarily being those given by Theophanes. In either case, the winter of 716 would end this first stage of the campaign, one which saw modest Arab gains in Anatolia, the overthrow of an emperor, and a great deal of underhanded dealing, but little in the way of direct engagement of the two armies. The year had been a more active one in the east, although on this front the Arabs met with little success. Yazid ibn al-Mahalab attempted a large-scale invasion of Jurjan and Tabaristan, the seat of the Dayyubid dynasty, and the last of...
You can't just let them be them? Can't just let them live over there by the water? No!
the independent vestiges of the Sassanid Empire, which had thus far kept its old rulers at the cost of paying tribute to the Caliph. Initially successful, he captured the town of Dihistan by siege, with a large massacre ensuing, strengthening his reputation for brutality and causing the region of Jurjan to capitulate without resistance and accept an Arab governor.
Wow, that was quick.
Continuing west into Tabaristan, Yazid would see less success. The ruling Spabed Farrukh Khan the Great appealed to his eastern neighbors in the Dailam region for military aid.
Oh, he's baiting them. You see that in the ambush?
And used the narrow mountain passes to hold off Yazid's much larger army. His army fell back, seemingly beaten in their first clash, only to lead the Muslims into an ambush, where they were pelted by arrows and boulders from higher ground and forced to withdraw. Though Yazid still commanded by far the stronger army, Farrukh Khan's successful resistance spurred the nobility of Jurjan, who had surrendered previously, to take up arms, killing most of the recently installed Arab garrison during the night.
So they're failing pretty bad.
With his supplies now cut off and hostile forces at his back, Yazid was forced to sue for peace, using the threat of renewed invasion to secure an increased tribute, but failing entirely in his mission of conquest despite the vast resources at his disposal. In Transoxiana, Waki ibn Abi Sud had failed to inspire the same respect among the locals Qutayba had, leading to turmoil and the gradual loss of caliphal control over much of the region. However, Waki's main focus seemed to be a growing rivalry with Yazid, rather than on keeping order in his province.
Why y'all beefing? Y'all ain't got nothing in common. You're so far away. Just focus on your craft and focus on your region. They're trying to become the next caliph. That's what they're trying to do.
After wintering in Cilicia, Umar would take to the sea again in 717, holding the dominant position in the Mediterranean, but still wary of facing Greek fire in the Bosphorus, while Maslama would finally reach Constantinople's walls in June. Perhaps learning from past failures, Maslama's army had brought vast stores of food to last them a long siege, with more being ferried to them from Egypt and Syria under the protection of Umar's fleet, with transport vessels and Dromon war.
So they got like a system in place. This should be successful, unless Constantinople surprises us.
Warships traveling in a convoy system for protection. To demonstrate his forces' commitment to the siege, no matter how long it should take, Maslama had forbidden his forces to eat from the rich stockpile of provisions they had brought, instead building low walls and wooden houses for the besiegers around the city, and sowing crops in the ground to sustain them.
So they're planting their seeds legitly, like actually.
Feeding themselves by plunder and soon by their own harvests, Maslama's massive besieging force was transformed almost into a small city of its own, and looked well prepared to weather the bitter winter approaching. But according to the Arab accounts of the siege, Leo and Maslama remained in negotiations at this point. Leo still feigned allegiance to the Umayyad prince, and claimed he was doing his best to convince his subjects to surrender. In the main version of the tale, Leo claimed that Constantinople's inhabitants would surrender in exchange for the Arabs' food stores to feed their trapped and hungry citizens and demonstrate the truth of Maslama's promises of safety in exchange for submission.
Uh-oh, what's about to happen?
When Maslama agreed, they looted the Arab army's stores and crops by night before returning to their defenses in the morning. In another version, Maslama even burns his own supplies on Leo's insistence that Constantinople would surrender without a battle if convinced Maslama was preparing for a major assault. At face value, these accounts might seem unlikely, but at this point, Maslama was negotiating from a position of strength. With transport ships from Tunis and Egypt resupplying him, he risked little, and an opportunity to avoid the daunting siege might have been too tempting to pass up. Whether the tales are true or simply a way to scapegoat one commander for a broader military failure, the Arab naval supremacy would not be long-lived. As the fleet continued to arrive and ferry soldiers for the siege, many sailing past the city as far north as modern Istanbul's Ortaköy neighborhood, the convoys would be forced to sail past the Golden Horn, which was blocked with a chain and harbored the Roman fleet, which had been waiting for their moment of opportunity. For the large and unwieldy transport ships to sail north against the currents of the Dardanelles required a south wind. On September,
I think I've heard this story where the Arabs, there's a chain, so for them to get over the chain, they move to the back of the boat to lift and then go over it.
the 1st, an unlucky change of weather would see 20 of these large and logistically vital ships betrayed by the breeze and drift backwards with the current away from the safety of their escorts. The Roman fleet wasted no time, sailing out from the Golden Horn to bathe them and their crews in liquid fire, a harsh blow with a cold winter approaching and a hit to the morale of the Arab fleet.
Dang.
In the historian Al-Tabari's words, the besiegers were forced to eat everything but dirt, suffering greatly over a cold winter outside the city. On this somber note, Caliph Suleiman would breathe his last, dying in October 770.
These caliphs live like they have a stressful job. They don't live very long.
In his brief reign, none of his grand ambitions had come to fruition, as Yazid ibn al-Mahalab's invasion had been a failure and the attack on Constantinople had been stalled. The legacy Suleiman had killed so many for and worked so desperately to build would largely be one of setbacks and failures, overshadowed by the triumphs of his predecessor.
Let me guess, Yazid's gonna be next.
Suleiman had initially intended to be succeeded by his son, Ayyub, but Ayyub had died earlier in the year of a plague that was possibly Suleiman's cause of death as well.
Okay.
Instead, on his deathbed, he declared his younger cousin, Umar ibn Abdulaziz, a long-time ally of Suleiman's who had served as his governor of Medina, to be his successor as caliph, creating surprise and resentment among closer family members, such as his brothers Yazid and Hisham, though Yazid was promised right of succession after Umar. It was no coincidence that the newly crowned Umar II shared a name with the legendary second caliph, Umar ibn al-Khattab. Through his mother's side, he was the second caliph's great-grandson, a prestigious connection he emphasized greatly. With the arrival of spring, the pressure began to mount on the Arab army besieging Constantinople.
On the Arab army? Provisions?
The loss of the supply ships the previous autumn had reaffirmed the superiority of Roman ships in combat. However, Leo's fleet lacked the numbers to actively patrol outside the Dardanelles, or safely scout the movements of the Arab ships. With the arrival of spring, sizable fleets from Egypt and Tunis came bringing supplies across the Mediterranean to the besiegers. Keeping their distance from Constantinople, they landed secretly in various places, from Chalcedon to the mouth of the Gulf of Nicomedia, on the Asian side of modern Istanbul. However, the crews of these fleets were mostly Coptic Christians of Egyptian descent, thousands of whom had been relocated to work the shipyards of Tunis after the conquest of North Africa by Hassan ibn al-Numan. Upon the fleet's arrival on Roman soil, organized mutinies among the Egyptian crews broke out among the Arab fleet, with the crews taking control of some ships, while many others escaped, fleeing to sanctuary among their fellow Christians in Constantinople.
Wow.
With the fleets paralyzed and crippled by the loss of so many crewmen, and Leo informed of the Arab fleet's location and sudden weakness by the defectors, the Roman fleet sailed forth once more from the Golden Horn, capturing or destroying the great Arab fleets nearly in their
That's insane. Like East, I did not know the supremacy. It's just crazy, the supremacy they have in the naval front.
Entirety. While the land army still held firm at first, the Romans had retaken full naval dominance for the time being. They cut the besiegers off from supplies or effective reinforcement, with the army divided by the now uncrossable Dardanelles. The entry into the conflict of the Bulgarian Khanate, ruled by Leo's ally Khan Tervel, would spell further disaster for the Arabs. With the besiegers on the European side of the Dardanelles cut off from retreat, without ships to ferry them across, a huge portion of the demoralized army, forced to spread out across the countryside to forage for food, and unprepared for the attack of a lightning-fast cavalry army, would be defeated and massacred.
This is not going to end well for the Arabs.
With the army facing destruction on the European side, smaller defeats at Roman hands in Asia, and starvation throughout, Umar would end the grand expedition and call his cousin Maslama home, leaving more than 20,000 dead to hunger, Greek fire, or Bulgar horsemen behind them.
Wow.
The disaster would weaken the Umayyad state and serve as something of a turning point. Though Umar would be well remembered for his political reforms, this largely marked the end of the great Umayyad conquests. More than the loss of manpower and ships at Constantinople, overextension and the rise of powerful governors would sap the ability of the Umayyads to project power outwards. Already the frontiers of Transoxiana and Iberia had been left almost completely to their own devices, with little support from faraway Syria, as anarchy and infighting ate away at the Caliphate's power in these far-flung regions. Only a few years before, the Umayyads had seemed at the height of their power, with illustrious conquerors expanding the Caliphate on every front. The death of these remarkable generals and leaders at Suleiman's hands only foreshadowed the death of the age of expansion they had championed. Umar would attempt to address some of these problems during his short and mostly peaceful reign. The poor treatment of non-Arab Muslims, a common cause for rebellion in past decades, would improve, with the jizya tax now exempted for all Muslims rather than Arabs only.
That makes sense. My goodness. I was waiting for that.
Attempts at reconciliation with the Shia would be made as well. Yet this is largely seen as the start of a stagnation and decline that would last until the Umayyads' overthrow some 3 decades later.
Wow. 30 more years.
Following Suleiman's death and the end of his disastrous period as Caliph in 717.
Okay, I think that's a good stopping point right there. Wow, I think they had an idea what they were gonna do. When Suleiman came on, but even before Umar, he just wiped all the governors out, all the people that helped to conquest previously. They just did not get recognized just because they might not have been in alignment in terms of politics. So they got wiped out. They tried to invade Constantinople. It looked like they were going to do a really good job with it, and they had a system in place, but the navy prevailed for the Eastern Romans. And then the Umayyads, that was a simple thing, and they couldn't figure that one out. So yeah, the Umayyads are in decline for sure. They're going to start to be on the defensive side if they don't watch out. So I'm excited to see kind of what happens from here. We got about 45 more minutes, so like maybe 2 or 3 more videos. So excited for what comes next. Appreciate you guys watching, every single one of you. I read all your comments. I really do appreciate you guys. You guys have a great rest of your day. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out. Bye-bye.